The year 1816 is remembered in history as an anomaly so extreme that it earned a name that still feels unsettling today: the year without summer. Across New England, snow fell in June. Frost struck crops in July and August. Rivers froze when they should have been flowing freely. In Europe, harvests failed almost everywhere at once, triggering famine, food riots, disease, and social instability on a scale rarely seen outside of wartime. Millions suffered. Hundreds of thousands died. Entire regions were pushed to the brink of collapse. For over 2 centuries, historians have offered a single, confident explanation. In April 1815, Mount Tambora in Indonesia erupted with unprecedented force, the largest volcanic eruption in recorded history. The blast injected enormous quantities of ash and sulfur aerosols into the upper atmosphere, reflecting sunlight back into space and cooling the planet. According to the official narrative, this volcanic veil dimmed the sun, disrupted global weather patterns, and produced a short-lived but severe volcanic winter that peaked in 1816 before gradually fading. Case closed. For most people, that explanation feels sufficient. Volcanoes affect climate. We have modern examples. The science appears settled. And for a long time, I accepted it without hesitation. But the deeper I looked, the more that explanation began to feel incomplete. Not wrong, just insufficient. The first warning sign appears when you examine the actual temperature records from 1816. These were not subtle anomalies. This was not a mild, evenly distributed cooling. This was climatic violence. Snow in Massachusetts during what should have been peak summer. Killing frosts, repeatedly wiping out crops during the growing season. Vineyards destroyed. Grain harvests lost. Livestock starving. These are facts documented in diaries, newspapers, shipping logs, and agricultural records across multiple continents. Yet what's often overlooked is how uneven this devastation was. Some regions experienced catastrophic collapse, while others reported relatively minor disruption. The cooling patterns were irregular and localized. In some places, temperatures plunged suddenly. In others, conditions fluctuated wildly from week to week. According to standard volcanic winter models, ash dispersal should produce more uniform cooling, guided by known atmospheric circulation patterns. The effect should spread gradually and fade slowly. But that isn't what the data shows. In several regions, the worst cooling appears too rapidly after Tambora's eruption to match expected atmospheric timelines. Even more troubling, some historical records suggest abnormal weather patterns beginning before April 1815. That alone should raise serious questions. Volcanic winters do not precede the eruption that supposedly caused them. And then there's the recovery, or lack of one. If 1816 were simply the result of volcanic aerosols slowly settling out of the atmosphere, we would expect a gradual return to normal climate conditions. Instead, recovery was erratic. Some regions rebounded quickly. Others remained unstable for years. The timeline doesn't behave the way volcanic cooling should. Atmospheric scientists acknowledge these irregularities, but they are often brushed aside as regional variation or data limitations. Yet when anomalies stack on top of anomalies, dismissal stops being an explanation. And climate is only the first layer of the problem. Because natural disasters, even severe ones, usually leave behind certain patterns. Temporary hardship, followed by reconstruction and normalization. But what followed 1816 was not normalization. It was transformation. Societies did not simply recover, they reorganized. New institutions emerged. Population movements accelerated. Systems for managing, housing, and relocating people expanded dramatically. The scale of the response dwarfs what we would expect from an 18-month climatic event, no matter how severe. This is where the volcanic explanation begins to crack. Because while a volcano can darken skies and ruin harvests, it does not explain why entire social structures were reshaped in its aftermath. It does not explain why population management became institutionalized. It does not explain why governments and organizations suddenly mobilized resources on a global scale during a period of supposed scarcity and chaos. The more you examine the aftermath of 1816, the more it feels like societies were responding not just to hunger but to displacement, not just to famine but to loss, as if something fundamental had been damaged, something that could not simply be replanted or rebuilt overnight. The official story tells us that a volcano caused a bad year, but the evidence suggests something closer to a rupture. And once that possibility enters your mind, the question becomes unavoidable. If the volcanic explanation doesn't fully account for what happened next, what else are we missing? What followed the climate collapse of 1816 was not a slow demographic adjustment, but a wave of human movement unlike anything most societies had experienced outside of war. Across continents, populations shifted abruptly. Villages emptied. Cities swelled and then shed their inhabitants just as quickly. Entire communities seemed to dissolve from the historical record. Official histories describe this as famine-driven migration, people simply moving in search of food and work. But when you examine the scale, timing, and organization of these movements, that explanation begins to feel dangerously incomplete. In Europe, the effects were immediate and brutal. Failed harvests pushed rural populations into cities already strained by scarcity. Food riots erupted in France, Britain, Switzerland, and parts of Germany. Governments imposed emergency controls, rationing, and relief measures. But what's rarely emphasized is what happened after the famine eased. Migration did not stop. It accelerated. Populations did not return to their original regions in meaningful numbers. Instead, people moved outward, across borders, across oceans, into entirely new population centers. This wasn't short-term displacement. It was permanent resettlement. Russia presents a similar anomaly. Census data from the early 19th century reveals sudden shifts in population density that cannot be cleanly explained by crop failure alone. Certain regions lose population abruptly, while others gain far more people than natural migration models would predict. These changes occur too quickly, and with too much coordination to be purely spontaneous. They suggest organized movement, not desperate wandering. In Asia, the pattern becomes even more unsettling. Demographic records from parts of China and Southeast Asia show unexplained gaps. Periods where population data becomes vague, inconsistent, or entirely absent. Communities appear in one record and vanish in the next. Official explanations point to famine, disease, and administrative chaos. Yet those explanations fail to account for the precision with which populations later reappear elsewhere, often concentrated in newly organized settlements. Nowhere, however, is the strangeness more visible than in the United States. Beginning in the decades following 1816, America witnessed the emergence of one of the largest and most systematic child relocation programs in history, the orphan train movement. Between 1853 and 1929, more than 200,000 children were transported from eastern cities to rural families across the Midwest and West. The official narrative frames this as a humanitarian response to urban poverty, overcrowding, and the breakdown of families during rapid industrialization. But this explanation collapses under scrutiny. This was not a loosely organized charity effort. It was a coordinated system involving transportation networks, religious institutions, government cooperation, and standardized procedures. Children were gathered in large numbers, placed on trains, and redistributed in waves. Many had no documented parents. Birth records were missing. Family histories ended abruptly. In countless cases, there was no trace of origin beyond the institution that delivered them. If these children were primarily victims of poverty caused by the 1816 famine, why does the timeline not align? The worst climatic effects ended by 1818. Yet the orphan trains did not peak until decades later. Why the delay? Why did the program persist for nearly 80 years? Why was the response not immediate but instead prolonged and expanding? Industrialization alone cannot explain this. Urban poverty existed before 1816. Economic hardship did not suddenly appear. What did change was the emergence of systems designed not just to assist families, but to permanently separate children from their places of origin, to move them away from specific regions, to erase continuity. This pattern mirrors what we see globally. Migration following 1816 was not chaotic, it was directional. Populations were moved away from certain areas and concentrated in others. Institutions arose to manage this process. The scale implies planning. The consistency implies intention. If famine were the only factor, rebuilding local agriculture would have been the priority. Instead, we see long-term removal of populations, especially children, from their environments. That suggests more than hunger. It suggests areas that could not, or should not, be repopulated. When viewed this way, the post-1816 migrations begin to resemble something far more unsettling than economic adjustment. They resemble survivor relocation, a managed response to a catastrophe that left certain regions unsafe, unstable, or incompatible with the story that would later be told. And once that possibility is considered, the question shifts from why people moved to what they were being moved away from. As population movements accelerated in the decades following 1816, another pattern quietly emerged, one that is rarely examined alongside famine and migration, yet may be even more revealing. Across multiple continents, massive institutional buildings began appearing in waves. Orphanages, asylums, workhouses, reformatories, poorhouses, structures of enormous scale, striking uniformity, and surprising complexity. Official history presents these buildings as humanitarian responses to poverty, disease, and social disorder. But when examined closely, their design, timing, and coordination raise questions that the standard explanation cannot easily answer. If the world had truly been plunged into economic ruin by famine, we would expect construction to slow, not accelerate. Resources should have been scarce. Skilled labor should have been unavailable. Governments should have struggled simply to feed their populations. Yet instead, vast amounts of stone, brick, iron, and timber were mobilized. Large teams of trained builders appeared. Standardized architectural plans were replicated across regions and even across national borders. This alone suggests that the societies of the early 19th century were far more organized and far better prepared than we are usually told. These were not improvised shelters hastily thrown together to house the poor. Many of these institutions were monumental. Thick masonry walls, reinforced foundations, symmetrical layouts, high ceilings, advanced heating systems, complex ventilation networks. Some buildings could house thousands of occupants, far exceeding the official need they were supposedly built to meet. The scale was not reactive, it was anticipatory. Even more striking is the consistency. Whether in Britain, continental Europe, or North America, these institutions share common design features. Centralized corridors, segmented wings, controlled access points, enclosed courtyards. The resemblance is so strong that it suggests shared architectural knowledge and shared purpose. Yet according to official timelines, there was little international coordination, limited communication infrastructure, and no global planning bodies capable of enforcing such uniformity. This raises an obvious question. How did disconnected regions arrive at nearly identical solutions at the same time? The architectural features themselves deepen the mystery. Many of these buildings include design elements that appear excessive if their sole purpose was housing the poor. Ventilation systems capable of filtering large volumes of air. Heating layouts designed to maintain stable internal temperatures despite extreme external conditions. Structural reinforcement that goes far beyond basic safety requirements. In some cases, subterranean levels with controlled access and heavy construction. These are not features you design for short-term relief. These are features you design when you expect long-term environmental instability. Equally puzzling is the architectural continuity visible in these structures. Official history often claims that advanced construction knowledge was lost after antiquity and only gradually rediscovered during the Industrial Revolution. Yet these 19th-century institutions display precision engineering, acoustic awareness, load distribution techniques, and material mastery that suggest uninterrupted knowledge transfer. There is no sense of trial and error. No visible learning curve. The builders already knew what they were doing. Then there is the issue of attribution. Many of these buildings are vaguely dated. Some are retroactively assigned to earlier periods without clear documentation. Construction records are missing, incomplete, or contradictory. In some cases, buildings appear fully formed in the historical record, with no clear account of how or when they were built. This is not normal for structures of such scale and cost. If these institutions were merely responses to poverty caused by a volcanic winter, why were they designed to last centuries? Why do they resemble fortifications more than shelters? Why do they appear simultaneously across regions that supposedly lacked the means to coordinate? The deeper problem is logistical. Large-scale institutional construction requires planning, supply chains, transportation networks, and administrative authority. According to conventional history, much of this infrastructure either did not yet exist or was in its infancy. And yet the response was rapid, coordinated, and remarkably consistent. This suggests that the infrastructure was already there. Rather than inventing new systems in response to disaster, societies may have activated existing ones. What looks like sudden institutional growth may actually be repurposing older frameworks adapted to new circumstances. Buildings that appear new may have been converted, reclassified, or absorbed into a new narrative about social reform and humanitarian care. When viewed through this lens, these institutions stop looking like charitable solutions to poverty and start looking like mechanisms of control. Places to house, manage, and isolate large populations for extended periods of time. Places designed not just to care for people, but to regulate them, protect them, and perhaps shield them from an environment that was no longer stable or safe. If something truly catastrophic had occurred, something beyond a bad harvest, then these buildings make sense. They are not signs of compassion alone. They are signs of preparation. And once you recognize that preparation, the question becomes unavoidable. What kind of threat requires this level of architectural foresight, global uniformity, and long-term institutional commitment? At this point, the investigation reaches a place where simple explanations no longer hold. When climate anomalies, mass population relocation, and synchronized institutional construction are viewed together, they stop looking like independent consequences of a volcanic eruption and begin to resemble a coordinated response to something far larger. This is where the nuclear winter hypothesis, however uncomfortable, becomes impossible to ignore, not as a claim but as a framework that explains patterns the official narrative cannot. A large-scale nuclear event produces specific and well-documented effects. Sudden and extreme temperature drops. Irregular cooling based on fallout distribution rather than atmospheric circulation. Localized zones of severe impact alongside areas of relative stability. Rapid onset rather than gradual change. Long-term environmental danger rather than short-lived disruption. When these characteristics are compared to the climate data surrounding 1816, the alignment is unsettling. The temperature shifts were abrupt. The severity was uneven. The recovery was inconsistent. These are not the hallmarks of a slow, evenly spreading volcanic winter. But climate alone is not the strongest indicator. Human response is. A nuclear-scale catastrophe would require immediate population management. Survivors would need to be relocated away from affected zones. Long-term housing would need to be established. Institutions capable of controlling environment, movement, and behavior would become essential. Records of what existed before might need to disappear, not out of malice alone but to prevent panic, unrest, or the collapse of social order. A simplified explanation would be necessary. Something natural. Something familiar. Something that does not raise questions about forbidden technology or lost capabilities. A volcano fits perfectly. Within this context, the orphan trains take on a far darker meaning. The systematic relocation of children with missing histories, moved away from specific regions, placed with new families stripped of origin. This begins to resemble the removal of witnesses. Not just victims of poverty but survivors of destroyed communities. People whose memories and identities connected them to a world that could no longer be acknowledged. The timeline suddenly makes sense. The programs did not peak immediately because the task was not emergency relief. It was long-term restructuring. Generations needed to be absorbed, identities rewritten, continuity broken. That takes decades. The architectural evidence reinforces this interpretation. Many pre-1816 structures display engineering sophistication that contradicts the narrative of gradual industrial progress. Acoustic precision. Advanced load-bearing systems. Astronomical alignments. Urban layouts planned with mathematical exactness. These are not the works of technologically primitive societies stumbling forward. They are the remnants of people who understood principles we are told they could not have known. Then comes the break. After 1816, humanity does not surge into innovation. It struggles. Technologies appear fragmented. Skills are rediscovered. Methods re-emerge slowly as if pieced together from ruins. This is not how invention looks. This is how recovery looks. The difference matters. If there truly was an advanced infrastructure before 1816, technological, architectural, organizational, its destruction would require an explanation that modern history cannot comfortably provide. A natural disaster allows continuity. A nuclear-scale catastrophe does not. It implies lost knowledge, lost systems, and lost authority structures. It implies that what followed was not the birth of modernity, but the rebuilding of something broken. This is where the Tartarian hypothesis enters. Not as folklore but as an attempt to name what official history leaves undefined.